Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out. We got a little bit of a small group, but we want this to be. I just want this to be as interactive as possible. Nobody wants to hear me stand up here and talk for an hour. That's not what this is about. I'm curious to know what those of you who are here have questions about, or what you want to get out of it, or anything like that. Like what sort of? Oh, cool! We got some more players. Awesome! Yeah. Great. Break out your basses, please. I was just saying, I want this to be as interactive as possible. I want to know kind of what you guys want to know, and we'll play a little bit. But yeah, I mean, please feel free if you have questions. A little bit about me to start out with. Those of you who don't know me, my name's Sankaran. I play bass with Unspoken Tradition. We're from Western North Carolina, around the Asheville area. And I have been around the bluegrass scene a long time. I grew up in central Pennsylvania and have been in the mid-Atlantic and northeast bluegrass scene for many years. And then about 11 years ago, relocated to North Carolina and have been living there ever since, playing music down there. Some of you may have seen me play with the Dixie Beeliners. I was with them for a number of years, and I'm very happy to be playing with Unspoken Tradition now, and really doing what I love to do the best, which is play some really hard driving, more traditional and some original style bluegrass. As far as the bass, I started playing. I actually started as a cellist. When I was in school, and then progressed to playing upright bass when I was about 10. Was classically trained and played a lot of jazz as well as playing bluegrass most of my life. And so my playing is kind of informed by all of that. So I have many influences from that classical training that I had when I was younger to the jazz that I played in my teens and in college, and of course a lifetime of playing bluegrass as well. So all of that kind of informs the playing that I do. But as far as from a strictly bluegrass perspective, I like to think about a five-piece bluegrass band, traditional bluegrass band, is like a drum kit. Okay, that's the way I always like to sort of think of it. The bass is your bass drum, right? That provides that rock solid foundation that everything else is based on. The chop of the mandolin on the 2 and 4, that's really your hi-hat cymbal on a drum kit, right? And then you have this underlying rhythm of the guitar. That's kind of your snare drum, okay? And then you have, banjo rolling along, right? And that's sort of that twinkly, ride cymbal over top of everything else. But everything is based on that bass drum. And that's really the biggest role that the bass plays, in bluegrass music, is providing that foundation. So whether I'm playing with our band or with other groups, or if I'm jamming in the campground or anything like that, I'm not thinking about taking a wild break and playing a lot of notes or anything like that. My job is to keep tempo first and foremost, and provide that foundation for the rest of the band. And so rhythmically, what we're talking about is the downbeat. So if we are in a measure of 4, you're talking about primarily the bass is going to hit on the 1 and the 3, and the mandolin is going to chop on the 2 and 4. All right? So just to give you an idea what that sounds like, let's just vamp on like a G chord. So this is our basic rhythm, right? So 1, exactly. It's that boom chick. It's a great way of thinking about it, right? So if I'm playing in the key of G, this is all I'm thinking about doing. Okay. And then let's say we're going to go to the 4 chord, that's the C chord. Same thing. And then back to the 1. To the 5. And back to the 1. Okay? So this is that's the basic rhythm. That's what everything else is based on. So if you get to the point where you're comfortable playing on the 1 and the 3 in those, in those basic chords, then you really have a big bass line, no pun intended, to build on top of. Okay.
If that's all you do, you have happy bandmates.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And I cannot stress this enough. A bassist's best friend is a metronome. If you are a bassist and you do not own a metronome, go home after the festival and buy one. There are free apps that you can get on your phone, or if you buy, an analog metronome or whatever, there's tons of options out there. They're not expensive. Most of the digital metronomes and the apps are like $5, $10, something like that.
To interject, this morning in the hotel room, I downloaded an app on my phone called Time Guru, and it's a metronome, but you can set it up where it will click, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it will randomly remove some of the clicks. So as you're playing along and the timing drops out, when it comes back in, you can see
how close you are.
Yeah, and
It'll keep you honest.
I got it out this morning and started playing with it, and I was kind of surprised. So, yeah.
That's why they hired me.
It is one of the hardest things to do is to keep that steady beat.
Yes.
Especially if you don't have somebody else doing it with you, like a bass player, just trying to keep that thing, watching that light go on that app.
Yep.
Trying to keep that beat on the light. Suddenly you're off. It's like, how did I get off?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you got off because it did.
Yeah, it doesn't lie. The metronome doesn't lie. It can be a cruel mistress, but but no joke. It's the best practice tool. Whether you are learning to just play that 1 and 3 really steadily, or you're playing some crazy classical piece or whatever it is, the metronome is always going to be your best friend. So we've talked about that basic beat, and another job the bass player has sonically within a bluegrass band is to provide a little bit of context about where the music is going next. Okay? So is everyone familiar with the Nashville number system as far as talking about chords being 1, 4, 5? Does that resonate with everybody? Okay. So when we're talking about a bluegrass song, and especially if you're not familiar with that jargon, if you walk up to a bluegrass jam and they're talking about the next song, it's like, okay, well, it's like 4 measures of 4, and then it goes to the 1, and then the 6 minor, and it sounds like they're speaking a completely different language, right? But if we're all on the same page, I'll continue to use that terminology. So let's talk about a really simple bluegrass melody that encompasses the 3 main chords, that 1, 4, and 5, okay? So let's do something, I don't know, just like...
Looking for something with 1, 4, 5?
Yeah, just 1, 4, 5, something real simple.
Like we can strum the chords to say like Big Sandy River.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Great.
1, 2.
Several measures, I was just playing that basic 1 and 3, correct? But if you noticed, every once in a while I played a 3rd or 4th note, which is what we call a leading tone, okay? And so what that basically does is, that's kind of your turn signal, Okay, that's the way I like to think about it. You're going straight in a line and you're about to make a right turn. Everybody else on the road needs to know you're making a right turn, so you put your turn signal out. And that's kind of what that leading tone is. And what that means is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a note that leads the band or leads the melody from that first chord to the second chord. Okay? So in this instance, the melody goes from a 1 chord to a 5 chord. Okay? So in this case, it's a G chord to a D chord. Okay? So let's play that beginning again, and then I'll show you what I mean.
2, 3, 4.
Okay? So can everyone see how sonically that led where we were going to go, right? So as the bass player in a bluegrass band, don't tell anybody else in the band, but you're in charge. Okay? It's a very quiet power, and I love it. It's one of my favorite parts about it. Take a bass player out of a bluegrass band and see how well they do without you. Okay? It doesn't have to be flashy. You might only play 3 or 4 notes in a span of a couple of measures, but those are the important ones, okay? Let the mandolin player and the banjo player and the guitar player play all the fast leads, but see how quickly they fall apart without you. So those leading tones, no offense, Audie, those leading tones are really those turn signals, right? So we're going to allow that car moving down the road. Okay, we're coming up to a right turn. We got to slow down a little bit. That's where that leading tone really comes into play, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so to understand what notes to play when we come to that, that's the next question, right? Well, I can't just play some random note. It's got to be something that makes sense. This is where I said the metronome is your first tool, right? The second tool that you absolutely 100% must practice as a bass player is your scales. You should be familiar with the major and minor scales in your basic keys, okay? So in bluegrass we play in a lot of the same keys a lot of the time, right? So we're in G, we're in A, we're in B flat, or we're in B most of the time. Maybe once in a while you throw in E and F. But start with those 4 and get to the point where you can just very comfortably play and know that a G major scale sounds like this. Okay? So that's pretty simple, real easy to play along with. And when I'm leading from a G, say, to a D, then that's where the knowledge of that D scale is really important, because I need to know what are the notes that they have in common that I can use to transfer from one to another. Okay? So that little bit, you don't need to be able to read music or anything like that, but a little bit of that music theory will go a long way to help you in playing, that stuff. Let's play a little. Audie, you know New Camptown Races? No?
Not well enough to
Okay.
fake my way through it.
How about, well, you know what, we did Shenandoah Valley on stage earlier, right?
Okay.
Let's do that one. You kick it off, and I'll play behind your break.
Okay, so
and
you're
then,
going to take it like a solo?
Yeah.
All right.
So what we're going to do here is we're going to play a little bit of an instrumental. Audie's going to play a guitar break, and I'm just going to play rhythm behind him. So be paying attention to how I'm always making sure to land on that first beat and the third beat, and then be thinking about the notes that I'm playing in between as well, okay? And then I'll take, and then we'll split one. You can take the first half, and I'll take the second half.
Perfect.
And then so I'll play a little bit of lead as well, and you can see where those scales really come into play whenever, if you want to step out and play a little bit of a bass solo, first of all, the crowd loves it, okay? They always love a bass solo. But the basis of that is always going to be your scales. That's where it's really important. And this one really illustrates it very well because it's very much scale oriented.
Maybe do this more moderate.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be blazing fast.
You want to actually put A.
So we're going to be playing this in the key of A. So your 1, 4, and 5 is going to be A. Anyone know what the 4 in A is?
D.
D. Okay, and the 5? Awesome. All right. Here we go.
That's why I have a capo. I don't do any of those things.
That's right. Bass players can't use capos. You know, maybe a C clamp or something. I'm not worried.
I use that for when I have to sing high notes. Sorry.
1, 2, 3.
Take the first half. So, yes, sir.
So you played that solo, that was just the scale of A?
Yep.
That's all you did?
That's basically all that was, and all I did was I was using the A scale and the D scale, both, and basically just, intermittently throwing some licks in there. So, as you can see, as I was playing the rhythm behind the guitar break, I was always making sure to hit that 1 and 3, right? But I was playing some of those leading tones that we talked about to, push the band to be playing the correct 4th next chord, okay? So let's do that again for our bassists who are here. We're going to do that one again, and we're going to do it slow, and we can all play it together, okay? So, again, the form is going to be the 1 chord, which is A, then it goes to the 4, then it goes back to the A, that's the 1 chord, right? And then we're going to go to the 5, all right? So those are the only 3 chords we're going to use throughout the whole song.
You can do it in all open strings if you want.
Yep, absolutely. That's the
Like when
beautiful
he was
thing
doing
about
that, I
A.
just kind of softly just did just open string
Yep,
while he was doing around because that was staying out of his way.
absolutely.
Trying to anyway.
So, Jeff, this time, if you would play rhythm behind, I'm just going to call the chords the first time, and then I'll join in, okay? So let's do it nice and slow.
All right.
Like that.
I'll do like a little.
Yeah, just
fiddly
take
cue.
us. All right, here we go. 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. Let's do that again. 1, 4, 1, to the 5, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. Okay, let's pause for just a moment. How did that feel, guys? Felt pretty good about that? All right, so a couple of things I want to give you some pointers on. First of all, you guys are sounding great. The tempo was awesome. Everybody was really on time. That's great. So everyone needs a little bit less metronome practice than I talked about. That's good. Okay. So what we're going to do is I want you to take your right hand, okay, and I want you to put your 2 fingers together like this. Now, so for those of you who are playing here, which finger do you normally use to strike your strings more often than your index here?
I use both.
Both? Okay, good. So everyone has their own approach. But the key, regardless of which finger you're going to use, you want to make sure that you're not going to be perpendicular to the neck here, okay? So if I'm trying to pull across the string like this, I can't really pull a lot of tone out of my bass that way, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to turn just about a 45-degree angle so that you're using the fattiest part of your finger, because that's going to give you the most tone. Okay, like sort of this middle part of the finger. If you're using way up here at the tip, I don't have a lot of strength here, right? So you really got to build that to the point where you're sort of pulling across the string, okay? So here's the coolest thing about being an upright bassist, right? Is we have a real physical connection to our instrument, right? We can feel that vibration inside of you, right? That's the cool part about it, is like you can feel it in your whole body, okay? So part of that is you don't want to feel like you're fighting the instrument, okay? What you're doing is trying to bring that natural tone out of the instrument, okay? And the easiest way to do that is, again, you want to use that fattiest part of your finger, and you'll see here I'm basically using the fingerboard as leverage, and I'm just allowing the string to sound, okay? I'm not trying to pull the tone out of it, right? I'm letting the bass do what it wants to do naturally, okay? And this allows me to have a nice big fat tone, okay? Can you feel how much tinier that is, right? But if I can be here, yeah, exactly. Remember I talked about the bass being the bass drum of that drum kit, right? So the attack is as important as the tone. This gives you both. I can get that attack, but I can let that bass do what it wants to do naturally, which is resonate. This is a big piece of wood, right? It just wants to resonate with that vibration. So this time we're going to play it again. I want to hear you guys really pull that tone out of your basses, okay? Let's try it one more time. Before we go into the second part, which has some slightly different chords, nice job, everyone. Those of you who are not playing right now at the moment, do you have any questions about anything we've covered so far? Does everyone feel comfortable with everything we've talked about up to this point as far as the Nashville number system and how we're pulling tone out of our basses? Does that feel like it resonates for everybody? Mm-hmm. All right, awesome. How are we doing on time?
Oh, we got lots of time.
Okay, cool, good.
I just checked, but
you know, like I said, I don't want to stand up here and talk the whole time. So this time we're going to progress into the second part. Okay, so I'm going to ask these guys to go ahead and play it. We'll go through the A part, okay, and then we're going to go into the B part. Does everyone know what I mean when I say that? Okay, great. So we're going to play the A part, and then I'll call the chords for the B part, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay? Let's try it again. Next time through, I'm going to play along this time, and when we go into that second part, when we go from the A part to the B part, so up to now we've been playing primarily open strings, right? So this time when we go from that A part and we go back to that B part, the first chord is D, right? So before we go into that D, I just want you to play C sharp, okay? So that's going to be just shy of your D, right? And that's going to be on your A string, okay? So we're gonna play that note as a leading tone right as we come into the B part, okay? Before we hit that downbeat, all right? Let's try that.
From the top.
Yeah, let's do it from the top. Nice. Here we go. C sharp. Real quick. Let's try it again. C sharp. There it is.
Here.
Great. So does everyone kind of see where it fits in? So it's just at the very end of the last measure of the A part as we're going into the B part. Okay? Do you guys want to try it again? Yeah, you
So
have a
I
question?
have a quick question.
Sure.
So, if we're playing on the ones and the threes, would the C sharp go on the four?
Yes.
Okay.
It's sort of actually, if you want to think about it, it's on the and of the four.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it's the very last part of the measure.
Okay, that helps a lot.
It's real quick. Yeah, absolutely. So let's try it one more time, and then we'll play it. We'll speed it up just a touch. Okay? Here we go. 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. Again. 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. C. There it is. One more time. 1, 5, 1. C. There it is. There you go. All right. Awesome. So now you've played your first leading tone. Okay? So all of that is going to come with practice, being more comfortable with your scales, talking about when you need to put that turn signal out to get the car to turn in the right direction, right? So don't worry if it doesn't feel super comfortable right now. We're just introducing it to you. But that is really one of the most fun parts about being a bass player, because I am driving the bus. And if I say turn left, the band's going to turn left. Okay? So, let's do it one more time. Do you guys have your instruments with you? Man. Yes, sir.
I have a question
Sure.
about style.
Okay.
Coming from a bit of a jazz background.
Mhm.
The rules somewhat different and more straight with the bluegrass stuff that I've seen.
Sure.
I've been corrected on sticking more to ones and
Yeah.
and fives.
Yeah.
When you're doing an approach note or a leading tone,
Mhm.
do you generally stick to scale tones? Or do you ever do like just a upper neighboring, like a chromatic half step kind of thing? I mean,
Yeah.
do you strictly stick to the scale tones, or
Uh,
what's appropriate or common?
That's a good question. So I think that is going to be determined primarily by the surrounding you find yourself in. So if I am playing with a very straight ahead, very traditional, leaning bluegrass group, I'm going to stick to, root 5, and I'm going to play scale tones almost exclusively. If I'm playing with maybe a group that is not afraid to step out of that framework a little bit more, that's where you can incorporate some of that other stuff that you're talking about. So style, like one of the best things about being a player, the joke about being a bass player, right, is that you can always find work as a bassist. There's always work for a good bassist out there. And part of that, on a practical, tangible level, is being able to scale your playing to the people who you're playing with. So whereas I have a classical and jazz background, that stuff informs my playing, but it doesn't necessarily going to come into my playing every single time I take my bass out. You know, if I'm playing, like I said, with a very traditional bluegrass band, I'm playing Group 5 the whole night. If I play 1 or 2, 3 leading tones like we were just talking about, that might be it, you know. On the flip side of that, if I'm playing with a jazz trio or quartet, you know, I'm going to step way outside of that boundary. So part of that is just feeling it out with your bandmates and kind of seeing what everybody's comfortable with and that kind of thing. I, like, personally, when I was just coming out of college and starting to play more bluegrass professionally, I'd always played bluegrass growing up, but when I started to play professionally, I actually had to scale my playing back quite a bit because I had come from several years of playing really, you know, heavily in the jazz world and classical stuff and whatever. So when I came back to bluegrass in a big way, I found myself having to pull back a little bit stylistically. And that doesn't take away from your playing. Some of the absolute best bassists I know in this genre might only play Group 5 the whole time, but they are rock solid, man. And so in the bluegrass genre particularly, attack means a lot because you are establishing the tempo for the rest of the band. The resonance of your bass means a lot because that provides that foundation sonically for everything that happens above it. And there's a lot to be said for restraint. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? Anyone have any other questions right now? Yes, ma'am.
What brought you back to bluegrass after playing jazz in college?
That's another really good question. A number of different things. First of all, the bottom line is I love it. It is, it's like the music of identity for me. Like, I grew up in the mountains. This music means a lot to me. I have a ton of fun playing it. And that really is at the core of everything. You know, our band, Unspoken Tradition, you know, in the name itself kind of talks a lot about how we feel about this music. Music evolves, it changes, and, you know, our goal as a band is to kind of bring that tradition into what we do, but to present a piece of modern mountain culture. And so that's kind of at the core of what we do. That's sort of our ethos. And I think that informs a lot of what I do musically as well. So all the other stuff that I did and learned and stuff made me a better player, certainly made me a better musician, but at the end of the day, I just had to come back to something that I really cared a lot about. So. Other questions? You guys want to play a little more? Okay. Let's try. We're going to do Shenandoah Valley Breakdown again, but this time we're going to try and speed it up just a touch. Okay? Everybody feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's try it one more time. Yeah.
That's
good. Yeah, nice job, guys. questions do you guys have? What would you like to work on?
I just want to say one thing, like, I'm kind of new to this. I play mandolin and guitar and stuff. I used to play electric bass a long time ago.
Okay.
I'm more of a lead player on the bass, you know? And like on the open teacher, I generally will play instead of the open down here. That's just the way I start. I kind of at the top and come backwards. And and I also like to do, you know, leading or walking and stuff. But the one thing that I need to learn is the hand position, how to work on that hand position, to be in the right place. Get my hand. I play the mandolin a lot. Now I try to play this.
Sure,
so
the scale length is a lot longer.
Get that scale length there. And
absolutely.
What would you suggest? You know how to.
The one thing that I always make sure that I have is my octave.
Yeah.
And with pinky.
Well, it's using the you fretting. Let's say fret the A string on your B. Let's say now with your pinky get the B up there.
There it is.
On the G
Yeah.
string.
Yeah.
So you are always maintaining that throughout. And it's funny because as your hand goes up the neck, your fingers kind of can't keep this.
Right.
They come together, and it just so happens that it's there. You know, because the scale shortens. So it kind of falls to hand if you kind of keep that octave going.
You know, and so I kind of recognize that octave thing, and then in being able to, I see other bass players, you know, their hands right there, and they're playing other notes in that same position. I know, like the first position.
So the traditional fingering classically is going to be 1, 2, and 4. Okay. So within any hand position, you're fretting the first note with your first finger. Okay. The middle finger is going to be your half step up, generally, and then your pinky is going to be a whole step from there. Okay?
You don't use this finger as much.
Yeah.
This one?
Now,
ring finger?
A lot of times you see, and I'm certainly guilty of getting lazy and doing it too, in bluegrass, particularly because bassists in bluegrass tend to like their action really high so they can really, pull on it. It makes it a lot more difficult to maintain that left hand strength because you're having to really press down on it a lot harder.
This is set up pretty low, and I like
perfect. That was going to be my
and
suggestion. Is if you really want to get your hand positioning down, and it will, pay dividends for you, keep your action a little bit lower, and then it goes back to the same thing I talked about earlier, is practicing those scales. So when you're practicing those scales, don't get lazy and do the claw. Like I said, I'm certainly guilty of it. I do it all the time. Sometimes, I find myself doing it. But yeah,
keep that stretch.
That 1, 2, 4 is really, because what happens is then as you're going up the scale, you've got that 1, 2, 4, and then your next note, your next hand position is that first finger. Okay, so as you're moving up the neck, there's your next note right there. And then I've got that same thing again, right? So keeping that and, working on your intonation, making sure that when you strike that note that you are right in the middle of it, that's going to train your ear. And one of the best ways to do that on a fretless instrument is if you have a clip-on tuner. I see that some of you guys, I think both have them on there. Use that tuner when you're practicing. Keep it on, and then it'll tell you when you fret that note or finger that note, that whether it's going to be sharp or flat. And part of the sort of journey as a bassist is getting to know your instrument, because no two basses are the same, right? The scale length is different. My bass is a 1949 American Standard. The basses of this time period from that particular manufacturer have a longer scale length and a really narrow neck, which works really well for me. I really like that. But if someone who's used to playing a 3/4 size bass, which is sort of the standard, picks up this bass, you'll notice the bout on this bass is a little bit bigger as well. So this is actually a 7/8 style bass, so it's a little bit bigger, longer scale length. So when I hand my bass to another bassist that's like picking up a couple of tunes in a jam or something like that, there's always that like, oh, where are the notes? Where are the notes? They're a little bit different, right? And I have the same problem when I go back to playing a 3/4 style bass. So that's kind of the fun. That's the journey.
Three-quarter?
That's going to be three. Yeah, you guys are both playing three-quarters.
Three-quarters.
Yeah, most. This is the exception to the rule. There are not a whole lot of them out there.
This thing's about 100 years old, but I think it's a three-quarter.
I heard it say that, bass players say that there's no money about the fifth fret.
That's on Dana Joe's.
Yeah, that's.
But so I want to ask you then,
Yeah.
how do you decide when to go up the neck, play high up the neck?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of talks to what you were talking about as well, as far as sort of playing your A up here rather than playing your open A, right? And that is partially stylistic. That's a decision, a stylistic decision that you make as a player. Now, we always have to remember that principle that I talked about at the beginning, which is the fact that sonically, in a bluegrass band, I provide that bass that everything else is built on, okay? So when you talk about sort of the range in which the bluegrass instruments fall, okay, you have a lot of sort of mid-tones between the rhythm guitar, the mandolin, and the banjo. Those are all sort of mid to high tones. And that can get really muddy in the middle if you don't have some definition, okay? So when we think about it that way, it's really not pertinent for me to be playing up here where I'm starting to bleed into those same frequencies, and that attack isn't going to come through, that foundation isn't going to be built. So that's why I'm going to be playing here most often when I'm talking about bluegrass, is going to be in that probably the first two hand positions on the bass. And that, again, it provides that foundation sonically for the rest of the band to work on top of.
Now the exception would be a solo.
Sure, yes, absolutely. That's your opportunity to step outside of that, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, sir.
At the end of the last time you guys were playing, you started doing a little bit of the percussive techniques, slapping and stuff like that.
Sure.
Could you go over some of the techniques and stuff?
Yeah, sure. So slap is a style basically in and of itself. There are many players out there who do it even better than I do. If you really want to see some impressive slap bass playing, go see a rockabilly band. Rockabilly bass players have their basses set up specifically for that, because stylistically that's really what is kind of it's based around. Rockabilly is actually very similar rhythmically to bluegrass, in the sense that in the same way that the bluegrass bassist is thinking about being the bass drum of that drum kit, in rockabilly you're not only playing the bass drum, but you're playing that hi-hat too. So in rockabilly, that's kind of the accepted style. So I take a little bit of that whenever I am doing it as well. And essentially, it's it's a two-part motion. That sort of basic eighth note slap. The first is, this is why it's really important to have your hand position here, because what I can do is sort of wrap that fatty part of my finger around the string and pull it away for that first note, right? And then I'm using sort of the fatty part of my palm to do the actual slap. So it's... So that's your sort of basic technique that you're going to use. And everything else in slap is sort of based around that. And it's important to sort of start it at that slow tempo, again, working with your metronome. Get comfortable doing it slowly, incrementally, ramp it up to the point where you're comfortable doing it, more quickly. Let's do that the same tune again, and this time we'll just split. You take the first half, I'll take the second half.
Okay. You want to tempo went up.
Yeah, a little bit faster, like normally where we play, kind of. So, I'm using that same exact, I didn't change my hand technique at all. All I did was play the same notes that I would play if I was playing them normally. I'd play the exact same solo, but I just applied that percussive technique, and it totally changes the way it sounds, right? So it can be a really good tool. Now,
Don't overuse it.
that's exactly what I was going to say. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Good tool.
It's that's the little seasoning that you sprinkle on top, okay? Because if you do overuse it, then it starts to sound like you're playing rockabilly, which is not the idea. But yeah, used sparingly, it can be a really effective technique.
It's almost like we do that passing tone.
Yep.
Remember going up to the D? If you do that every time you go into that D in that song, it's going to be, okay, don't do that so much.
Yeah.
You do it once.
Absolutely.
Choose that place where you're going to do it, and then it's interesting.
Yep.
If you do it too
And
much,
that's
it's
where-
like, yeah, okay, I heard that.
That's where you start to move outside of sort of following along to really shaping your style as a bassist. I think my bandmates would probably agree that the sort of the core of what I do as a bluegrass bassist is all about attack and driving the band forward. Here's something we didn't really talk about, and this is something that you can do when you're doing your metronome practice, and that is that your attack is not necessarily at the center of the beat, okay? You want your note to be at the center of the beat, right? But when we're practicing with that metronome, we know that if I pull that tone, if you were to look at that waveform like on a screen, right, it starts, there's a center, and then it fades, right? So the center of that note needs to be at the center of the beat. That means that my attack actually has to be on the top, the front part of the beat, right? And that's what is really going to be desirable as a bluegrass bassist, because if you listen to any of the great driving bluegrass bassists, guys like Mike Bubb come to mind, Barry Bales, and then going back to the first generation, Cedric Rainwater and all of these guys, Cousin Jake and all of these players who sort of defined the style, they're all playing, essentially, they're attacking the front of the beat, and the center of that note is right in the middle. And what that does is keeps the band in time, because, of course, we as humans have a little bit of reaction time, right? So if you're pushing that beat just a touch, then the band actually comes into time in the center of the note, okay? So be thinking about that whenever you're thinking about how you actually attack that string.
How do you know you're not pushing the song too much?
Good question. First of all, your bandmates will give you dirty looks.
Yeah, we'll let you know.
So we talked about sort of the metaphor of the bluegrass band being a car going down the road, right? And that leading tone being your turn signal and that kind of thing. It doesn't ever want to feel like the car's out of control, okay? So part of your job as the bassist is not just to keep it perfectly in time to a metronome. If you have a band that's tight enough that you can all play to a metronome and be dead center, that's great. But one of the coolest things about bluegrass is that it has some flexibility in it, right? If you listen to like sort of the great bands, in our genre, most of them, they're very technically precise, but there's room for the song to move and breathe inside of that framework, okay? So if the band is slowing down a little bit, you can push it a little bit forward. If the band is pulling away from you, I can actually lay back my attack and bring the band back to me, okay? This is that unspoken power that I was talking about earlier that I love having. You're driving the bus.
So what other instrument are you hearing that you're pegging your beat to?
Good question. The rhythm section of a bluegrass band is basically the bass, the guitar, and that chop of that mandolin. One of the greatest joys as a bluegrass bass player is when you get a mandolin player who is like a metronome, who stands right next to you, and you can lock in those 4 beats. Man, there's nothing that feels better than that.
2 of you crunched together like that.
Yeah.
It's fabulous.
Absolutely. I mean, seriously, the hair standing up on my arm just thinking about it. Like, there's nothing that feels better than that whenever that band really tightens up. But yeah, that's what I'm listening for. I'm listening for where is my attack on the beat? Where is the mandolin player's chop? And then sonically, the holes in the space in between that is filled by the rhythm guitar. And so his job is to make sure that when he's playing chords and not playing lead, that his attack is on beat, and so that that sort of mid-range tones can kind of float in between sort of the low and the high that the bass and the mandolin are creating.
And and it's interesting to me when you've got a bass player and a mandolin player that are so locked in, it makes my job become so much, it's almost like the rhythm guitar seems to kind of, you don't hear it as much. Like it kind of just glues everything together, but that has so much to do with the pocket that's created by the bass and the mandolin.
So what happens when they come off to do a solo and all of a sudden that mandolin isn't there or that guitar isn't there?
Sure.
Somebody else is in bluegrass, if the mandolin's not doing the chop, the banjo picks up the chop.
Yep.
Or I've even,
Or the fiddle
in
picks
some
up the chop.
cases,
Or
I
you
even
might have to-
alter my strum pattern to pick up
Yeah.
a little bit of that. It's, yeah.
That's the coolest thing.
Somebody
Okay.
does it.
But one of my favorite things, and we're getting towards the end of our time, so I'll kind of like say this and then we'll kind of close up. But my favorite part, you were asking about why I came back to bluegrass. This is it. A really good tight bluegrass band is an organic entity. It is always, it's moving, it's breathing, it's changing, and each one of the members has to be really on top of their own job, just like organs in a body. And if one organ isn't functioning, it's not going to work, And when it really is like, and you're super physically fit, it's awesome, And that's the fun part about it. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? Hopefully this was useful to you guys. I really appreciate everyone coming out. We'll just play a little bit. We'll play ourselves out here. You want to do that Trouble in Mind?
Sure. Where do you,
In A.
Yep, sure.
appreciate you coming out. Unspoken Tradition will be back on the main stage at 5:45. So come see us. We'd love to shake howdy with you after the show as well. We also, if you guys are camping and want to stick around for the late night, after the main stage closes, we're going to be hosting the late night jam tonight at 11 o'clock.
By the gazebo?
Yeah, at the gazebo up by the main entrance. We've got a lot of super talented friends here this weekend that are going to come join us. Bring your instruments, join in, please. That's what that's all about. Yeah, if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to see me afterwards. I'm happy to talk to you. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Rob.